comments from you. Yeah.
My glasses.
Specialized.
Ellen, the meeting is live now.
Now I get to keep.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody and formally start the meeting. It's 4 o'clock, exactly on time. Is that right? Okay. But before we start really being formal, I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge that Measure H passed. Yay. And I know it's been a while since that happened, but it was a huge thing. That was pulled off by so many people, made that happen. And I wanted to be sure to, to acknowledge that today would be a very different meeting if Measure H hadn't passed. And, but we did it. And it was the support of everybody in this room and the services that are provided by everybody in this room. And so I hope you feel good about that. And thanks to the voters in Santa Rosa. Big thanks to all the public that's not listening right now, but if anybody ever listens, then they'll know that we appreciate them. I specifically also want to thank Scott Alonso and his team, because you all worked really hard to educate the public about what they would be missing if we didn't have Measure O. And I don't know if Scott's not here today, but I want him to know, and everybody on the staff that worked hard to create that. You did a great job. Everybody I talked to had heard about Measure H, so that's great. And then I also want to acknowledge the vote yes on Measure H team that was headed up by the person who was mayor then was Chris Rogers and Councilmember Tom Schwedhelm, Karen Weeks, who's the chair of the Planning Commission, Logan Pitts, who's chair of the Board of Community Services, and there were a couple of people from the unions too. I think it was Stephen Del Porto, and Jeff Woods from the fire union that worked. And I was on that committee too, but it was helpful to get the word out in a different way. We raised money and did all that kind of stuff to make sure that we could do that. So I want to acknowledge them. And then I also wanted to thank Alan and your team, because I know this is not something that's done on a regular basis, right? And so it takes time and energy to know how to do it, a lot of extra work, and you already have a full-time job. So thank you for that. Before I go on to the very formal meeting, hi Jenny. I wanted to also announce that Yvette Miner, who has been our co-chair, is now the chair. She has been appointed that by our new mayor, and so congratulations.
Thank you.
And I know she'll do a great job. And I just wanted everybody on the committee to know that it's been fun for me. I don't know if fun is the right word. Yeah, no, it's been fun. It's been great, actually, to be back in this environment again. It's work that I care tremendously about. And so it's been a privilege to be back into it again. And everybody here who's been on the committee, and of course staff is always prepared, but the committee members, you've always been prepared too with good questions. So I know you've done your homework. And Yvette has always been one of those people who's had lots of questions. So now she'll be on the other end of that. But I wanted to thank you for the hard work that you do and your commitment to it, because it's near and dear to my heart, all of it. So thank you very much. So now on to the formal parts of the meeting. I've already called it to order, and then could the recording secretary please call the roll?
Chair Minor?
Here.
Member Bailey?
Here.
Member Cosgrove?
Here.
Member Hinnant? Member Atkinson? Member Holmes?
Here.
Member Caston?
Here.
Let the order reflect that all subcommittee members are present, with the exception of members Hinnant and Atkinson.
Great.
And then could the recording secretary explain how public comments work?
At each agenda item, the item is presented. The chair will ask for committee members' comments and then open it up for public comment. The host in Zoom will be lowering all hands until public comment is open for the agenda item. Once the chair has called for public comment, the chair will announce for the public to raise their hands if they wish to speak on a specific agenda. If you're calling in to listen to the meeting audibly, you can dial 9 to raise your hand. The host will then call the public who have raised their hands. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes, and a timer will appear on the screen for the committee members and public to see. Once all live public comments have been heard, the meeting host will read emails submitted. If you provide a live public comment on an agenda item, but also submitted an email, the email comment will not be read during the meeting. Additionally, there is one public comment period on today's agenda to speak on non-agenda matters, which is item 2. This is the time when any person may address the subcommittee on matters not listed on this agenda.
So we're approval of the minutes now. Is that where we are?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I need someone to, well, I'd like to see if anyone would ask for, I can't get my words out. I need someone to move to get the, have the approval of the minutes from the last meeting, please.
I move to approve the minutes from November 3rd, 2022.
Thank you. And a second?
I'll second.
Great. Okay, and then item number 4. And item number 4 goes to Chair Minor.
Okay, now it's my turn. Okay, now we're moving on to 4.1, and we need to make a decision on a vice chair. So is there anyone willing to be my assist? Are there any nominations?
I'd ask if the past chair was interested first before.
Oh, I don't think so. I think there's plenty of talent in the room.
Oh, you're looking at I would not be able to move for myself, but I would take it if someone
Okay.
offered.
Okay, I move that Nick Caston be, did I say, am I saying it correctly? Do I have to say that oh my gosh, member Nick Caston be nominated to be co-chair?
I second.
And then you need to call for a vote.
We'll call for a vote.
Chair Minor,
Yes.
Chair Bailey,
Yes.
Member Cosgrove,
Yes.
Member Hennett,
Yes.
Member Atkinson,
Yes.
Member Holmes,
Yes.
Member Caston.
Abstain.
I saw your hand go up. Did you have a question?
No question.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so now moving on, I am now the chair. So thank you all for your vote of confidence. And so we will be going into the duties now of what consists of the vice chair. Chair Minor will be the chair for one term in 2024 due to elections, of course. And then once that is done, depending on the outcomes, we'll determine whether or not I will be on still as chair. If not, we will have to take votes at that time. So moving on to any additional comments or questions? Okay, moving on to 5 scheduled items.
Can I stop here for a sec? We have a couple of one new member.
Yes, I am so sorry. I met him earlier. So we're going to go ahead and do introductions. And we'll start with our new member on the end, Ethan.
Nice. Hey, my name's Ethan Cosgrove. I was approved by Mark Snob. And I got involved with this because I teach middle school at Spring Lake. And we try to get really involved in the community. You may have received some letters from some of my students recently, actually. And he thought this would be really interesting because some of the gang prevention, violence prevention really dovetails into middle school, and we're right next to Montgomery. So obviously we know what happened there recently. So that's why I'm here.
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Elias Hennett. Currently work as a career and education coordinator for Social Advocates for Youth. And this is going to be my second year on the committee. And yeah, happy to be here.
Good to see you.
I'm Jalen Holmes. I am the CEO of CAF Charities, and I work closely in all of these different arenas. And this is my second year.
Great. Melanie Bailey, I'm now the past chair of this committee. I'm glad to be here. Nice to see everyone in person. Again, really nice.
And again, I'm Chair Minor, and moving up from vice chair to chair, and I'm a community member. That's my day job.
Nick Caston, also really glad to see you all in person. Your little boxes just don't do you justice. And I live in Southwest Santa Rosa. My son's in the West Side Little League and goes to Cesar Chavez Language Academy, and just very enthusiastic advocate for everything that you're doing for us for the city.
Hello, everyone. My name is Manza Atkinson. I was appointed by Councilwoman Victoria Fleming. This is my second term. I'm really excited as Nick is, to be here to see all of you in person. I think that just about does it.
Most important part, right?
Okay, with that being done, we're going to go ahead and move to item 5.1, measure overview. So at this time, we will review and discuss transition from Measure O to Measure H. So now it will be in the staff hands.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Veronica Connor. I'm the budget manager here at the city and also the staff liaison for this public safety special tax. And we're going to just go over some of the changes with Measure H passing last November, the transition going from Measure O to H. And I do want to say that we're going to make an effort at a name change here. We may be calling it Measure O for the next few years, even though Measure O is obsolete, and Measure H might get confused with other Measure H's that may come along in the future. So we're going to try to name it to more generic Santa Rosa Public Safety Special Tax. It might be a mouthful, special tax for short. And I know old habits die hard, but we'll do our best here. So just going through some of the background. In 2004, Santa Rosa voters approved Measure O, which was a 1/4-cent special sales tax to be used for public safety and violence prevention. And the original expiration date was in March of 2024. Upon passage of this, the voter-approved ordinance was incorporated into the Santa Rosa City Code. There's a whole chapter, which is 326, called Transactions and Use Tax, which goes over all the ins and outs of this special tax. From there, nothing changed until 2015, when we went back to the voters and we recalculated the way that we do our baseline calculation, which has to do with our general fund portion of public safety and violence prevention, how that works in conjunction with the special tax, but there was no actual changes to the way the special tax works. And next slide, please. So back in 2015, nothing changed up until recently. In November of 2022, voters approved Measure H, which extended this 1/4-cent sales tax another 20 years through March of 2045. So at this time also, this expanded the permissible uses. And we'll look at that on the next slide, please. Next slide. There it is. So with the adoption of Measure H, the ordinance was written that it retains all of the permissible uses of Measure O. Nothing was taken off or redacted. Everything continued forward. And in addition to that, we added the following items: mental health response teams, services and resources, programs and services to reduce wildfire risk, including early fire alerts, evacuation planning, defensible space inspections, and vegetation management, mental health counseling, wraparound services, and programs for at-risk youth and their families, maintain rapid 911 response. The measure also added the Roseland and Southwest Santa Rosa to the current list of areas specifically identified for funding of police services. So this list again is the changes that have occurred between Measure O and Measure H permissible uses. It's just an expansion of what was already there. And next slide, please. So looking ahead, these expanded permissible uses defined in Measure H may now be funded with the tax revenue. We are not waiting to a certain point when this comes into effect. It's in effect now. And so departments will present their proposed budget appropriations in the item after this for the 23-24 fiscal year. And the authority to levy these taxes is now imposed by this chapter shall extend through March 31st, 2045. So in conclusion, this new measure that was passed in November is in effect. We have a new expiration date of 2045, and all of these expanded permissible uses can now be used with the funds that are coming in. So we just wanted to clarify that because I know there were some questions around, do we have to wait for Measure O to end before Measure H starts? And the answer really is they kind of just go from one into the next for our public safety special tax. And that's it for the quick overview. I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
I'm really glad that we need to change the name because Measure O was in the paper yesterday. I think it was something to do with the county tax.
Yeah, it's confusing.
It's going to be it's a lot of confusion around that. So public safety tax, can we just call it that?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I do have a question about that. For me, not everything in our tax, in the Measure O, Measure H is public safety. So I have a problem with the name. So can we take a second look at the name?
Sure.
Because we want something that's going to incorporate community engagement in parks and recs. And yes, it could probably help with safety, but they're not safety. So can we, I don't know how we can take a look at that and see how we can get a better name for it.
Absolutely. We're open to suggestions. We thought about public safety and violence prevention special tax. That seemed a little long. So it was originally sold and titled a public safety special tax, which seemed kind of the safe generic look, but we're happy to take any suggestions and definitely will.
Is that something you're going to open up to the community as a whole, or maybe community engagement can ask the community for suggestions?
Well, I think what we're doing is, I mean, it's really more of an identifier for us within the city. Mm-hmm. So as we as staff, as you as a committee, and we are reporting out on that, we're just trying to convey exactly what it is. We've got our regular sales tax that comes in, our Bradley Burns sales tax. We have a general sales tax. I forget what measure that was. Q.
Yeah.
We try not to call it Measure Q, but I think sometimes we do. The problem is that we've got 3 different sales taxes that come in. This is these taxes, it's a special tax. It can only be used for these things. We're just trying to make a name that we can identify it as we are reporting out to it. I think that there is actually if we really went to it, there's a title within the ordinance. I'd have to look at it. I think Veronica mentioned it, but let us kind of workshop what would work for this without it getting too long and too laborious. I don't know that it would be. I think again, because this is kind of more of an internal moniker that probably don't need to go out to the full community, to something to where what we're talking about. And more importantly, the council isn't confused when we talk about what sales tax that we're actually talking about. That's the only reason why we actually call it a public safety special tax, because that's kind of literally what it is and how it went. But your point is very well taken. It does have other components that are beyond just the general public safety. So we'll figure something out.
Yeah.
I greatly appreciate, I have my comments on something different, but I would say I greatly appreciate that. And I think we should keep the acronym to less than BACMED's number of letters. We shouldn't exceed like 6 or 7 or wherever they're at. My question is going back to the new authorized expenditures. I know some of the language has changed, so we actually did technically remove some of the authorizing language from Measure O. I'm specifically thinking of school resource officers were specifically itemized in O, and they're not specifically itemized in H. And just considering the direction of where we're heading with the community, I just want to confirm that we're all under the same interpretation that like, should we reinstate the school resource officer program, that would fall within Measure H.
Yes, it can.
Okay.
It's not saying that they can, it does not say the funding cannot be used for.
Right. Okay. So that is because there was language that came out, but we're saying because we made the language broader that all those things still are intended to be a part of it. And the fact that we remove that language doesn't mean that we're not going to do that.
Exactly. Yes.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay. Are there any public comments on this matter?
No hands raised in Zoom.
We received no emailed comments.
Okay, now if nothing else, we're moving on to item 5.2. 5.2, fiscal year 2023-2024 proposed budget. We will be reviewing and approving by a motion for the fiscal year 2023-24. So staff.
Where's the slide?
Who's going first?
I can.
Okay.
It's not that one.
I don't know where the slide clicked. So if you want to advance. So the Recreation Neighborhood Services and then the Violence Prevention Partnership, the public outreach. If you could advance the slide. And this is what we're focused on, is kids and making sure they stay active. So if you could advance the slide again. So I'll go over the budget and then Jeff is going to review some of the uses and staffing. So as you can see for the neighborhood services, this is the programmatic part doing direct services out with kids in the community. So the salaries, almost 600,000, but roughly half of that is temporary employees. So we have a core of regular employees, city employees, but then we also work with a huge number of youth who I think the last time I dug through the numbers, about a third of them actually are kids who participate in the programs. So then they go on to help work for us. The benefits, of course, services and supplies, the vast majority of that is going to be the operating supplies that we need to perform the activities. So sports during the summer, after school, throughout the school year. And if you could advance the slide, I'll turn it over to Jeff Tibbetts, our Deputy of Recreation.
Thank you, Jason. Before I start, I want to address, there's always kind of this, is it misleading, right? I mean, the information that was just put up there, those figures are public safety tax. Did I use the right words? But the reality is neighborhood services is a leveraging of funds. One of the things the ordinance does is it protects the general fund baseline of neighborhood services. So there is general fund money that's involved with that. And then opportunities we have to leverage funds like our agreement with Burbank Housing to say, hey, we've got some permanent staff thanks to measure or to public safety tax. But obviously, if we're able to do a contract with Burbank Housing, have them fund the operational cost, then we're leveraging those funds, we're able to do more with it. So as I start to go into it, I just want to be very clear. I'm talking about that whole picture. Right? I mean, this is everything that neighborhood services is doing. So yes, very much anchored by the funds here, but it's, you know, if we have opportunities to bring in other sources and do more, we're obviously going to be looking to do that. So as I jump into the programs, there's the staff breakdown. Again, one supervisor, 2 coordinators, and 1.5 specialists. Those are the permanent positions. And those are what are all funded through Measure H. I'm going to keep going back to it. And then again, that is our supervisor. We only have the 1 coordinators. We only have the 2. We have 1.5 specialists that are funded through general fund. And then we have the limited term specialist that's in part to the Burbank Housing contract. So a couple other permanent staff from some other funding that are contributing. Those temporary hours, again, are related to the Measure H funding. And so again, we're pulling in other sources and contributing. So that's a snippet of what the staffing is. It's a big chunk of it, but there are those other aspects. So what are we doing with all of that? What does that look like when you get down to the program level? So kind of broke it down into a few areas. One is support of youth and families during out of school time. We know this is really important in our community. When kids aren't supervised, kids find fun ways to entertain themselves that us as adults, we don't always agree with. So what does that look like? It's after school programs, it's summer camps, and it's break camps. So after school programs, that's the agreement with Burbank Housing. We're up to 8 sites that we're budgeted for this upcoming year. I do have a list of what those sites are, but that could fluctuate and everything. So we kind of have a plan as we go into it, but then the agreements and everything dictate, and maybe there's a rise of youth in one neighborhood and numbers are bad at a complex or something. So we're always flexible in working with Burbank Housing as a partner on that. But we're looking at 8 sites. I'll be honest, I've been at all levels of that type of programming. It's a very challenging type of programming. Right? I mean, the ideal model is the kids are at school, they stay at school, you have 100+ kids at one site, you send a bunch of resources there. But the reality is that doesn't catch all of our kids. There's kids on wait lists, there's kids that are going home and not being supervised. So having a model like Burbank Housing, while it's very challenging and very difficult because you're going and you're sending resources to serve 15 to 20 kids instead of, they're already at school. It is an important thing in our community, that extra safety net to have. So across the board, you're talking, up to about 160 kids that could be served through those programs, which is essentially adding a whole extra, very large after school program. So very exciting to see, as I've been involved with it for many years, and it's an ebb and flow, a tough program to see that it's at a really high level right now. Summer camps is our recreation sensation model programming. And again, we're budgeted for 4 sites for that. We lay that out as 2 partnering to do at Santa Rosa City school sites, 1 at a Roseland school district site and 1 at a Bellevue. But again, that's just kind of a general planning thing that actually one of the things that we're looking at is some of the sites that we've used in the past. Schools have, I believe I believe it looks like we won't be able to Lincoln Elementary School, which is usually one of our sites because I think they have some major construction taking place this summer. Those things come up each year and you got to have backup plans. There's one site that we're working on that we may try something new and have a double site at one location because there's a school that might be able to offer us a large number of classrooms. So again, it's give and take, right? There's some benefits to that to say, hey, we can streamline where your resources go, but that's also one less location for families to get to. So balancing those types of things, but looking for creative ways to get out there and serve as many kids. That RecSend program can serve 400 plus kids in the summer, and that's obviously exciting. And then the break camps are your traditional school break camps, winter camp, spring camp, and fall camp. And that's one of the areas where I really think staff enjoy kind of expressing some of their creative outlet of it's, especially through COVID, I've reported on different things that we've done, or, having one that's a specialized art theme, or younger kids and older kids, and those types of things. So it fluctuates, but it's that general service of providing when schools are out. Moving on to extracurricular activities, the list just keeps growing, and I'm going to spend a little time here giving kudos to staff. But futsal, if you're not familiar, is kind of an indoor soccer type activity. And just to quickly tell the story of that, and kind of the passion of the staff is we had Comstock Gym 10 years ago, and we had a program that ran and it ended, and the next program didn't start for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever it was. And instead of staff saying, oh, good, we got a second to break, someone said, hey, we've got gym access for 5 or 6 weeks. What could we do with it? And so someone said futsal. Someone else jumped on Google and looked it up because we didn't really know what futsal was. And now 10 years later, it's a staple program that's in our budget. Baseball and softball, really excited to say that we're working towards bringing the Junior Giants program back. Haven't had that since COVID. And so that program coming back. Basketball with Junior Warriors is back up and running. Cheer, flag football. We have not had flag football in a while. I just went out last week on Friday night out at For Pete's Sake and saw that program getting reestablished. And it's always good for me to get out there and remember, like, oh yeah, this is why I spend the time in the office, is so that there's 50 kids out here with positive role models having fun. Dance, again, I talked about that in the past. That's a program that when we couldn't do cheer during COVID, we shifted and they ran a dance program. I heard that they were going to, the public loved it and they're like, oh, we're going to keep it. My assumption was, oh, instead of having 2 sessions of cheer, we'll have 1 session of cheer and 1 session of dance. That's not how the staff operate. They said, well, no, we're going to get back to having 2. So it's going to be 2 sessions of cheer and a session of dance. They just added it on. Middle school soccer is a huge program and a huge, I want to be clear, there's a lot of work to still do, the partnerships with the schools, everything to get that program up and running, but it's back in the budget. We know that we need programming for middle school youth, and at its peak, before transportation, some different issues became an issue that stopped the program. We were serving about 200 middle school, 180 to 200 middle school. When it started, it was, you're trying to get 1 team at each school. And then within a couple of years, you're like, oh my gosh, we're having to cut kids. That's not what this program's about. And so adding a second team to each school. So that's what we envision. Is that going to happen this first year? There's a lot of work to do with transportation and agreements with schools and stuff, but it's back in the budget. And I'm really excited about that because it's a key program that I've heard so many positive things from staff that, work for us now that we're involved with that program and how much it means to them. So, and then some of those extracurricular add-ons like Girls Circle, STEM programming, those types of things that aren't necessarily a standalone program, but get paired up with what we're doing and enhance and allow us to offer more. And then the third category is kind of the creating experiences, right? This is community and family events, it's field trips. And one of the things I wanted to highlight with that is, since I've been in this position, I've heard a lot about how do we integrate with what we're doing with Measure H and what recreation in general is doing. In some areas, that's going to be a challenge and it's a goal of mine and we're working on it. And there's some first steps that we could take. And so I wanted to highlight, those events are things like trunk or treat for Halloween, or the Spring Fest, or, a party at the pool, those types of events where we really gather the communities and families together. And so a couple of those that's an area where we've taken some of those first steps. So we had a recreation fairy tale ball and we had a Measure H, I forget what it was called, but so this year we ran that. We pulled those resources together and said, we're going to, instead of using half of Findlay, we're going to use the whole complex. And it was really cool to be there and see, again, that was an easy one to do it with, but it was like, yep, we're getting the families together. We're not running one event at Finley for this part of our community and another event at Steel Lane for a different part of our community. So we're seeing success with that and where we can take those easier steps. And there's some things that are going to be more difficult. You know, flag football is a little bit easier. That's park space. So I see as we get that program back up and running that we can really blow that up and make it just a Santa Rosa program that if you are a member of through Measure H, then you sign up under those, but it's all the kids playing together, right, is the dream. You know, something like junior wars basketball is a little more challenging where it's like, okay, we're limited on gym space and we already have a wait list. And so if we try to blow that up, then we're taking some of the kids who don't have these resources off of a team to get, you know, so it gets complicated with that, but we're continuing to take those steps. And that's one of the areas we've really been able to do that so far. So again, I just kind of want to wrap up with just how proud I am of the staff. There's a lot of things on here. That limited term position is allowing us to do a lot of things like, you know, they added middle school soccer, they added flag football, they brought dance on. We've added more after school program sites and they didn't take anything off the plate, right? And a lot of that is development of things over COVID and those types of things. And so staff are really, there's a capacity limit that I'm a little concerned with and I'll be keeping an eye on and monitoring. But I really think it tells the story to rest assured that those staff really care about what they're doing. They care about our community, our youth, our families, and they're really being creative and thinking outside the box for how do we do everything we can do to serve the community. So I'm really excited about the budget. I went back to them and said, are you guys sure? As I flipped through the pages and prepared this slide. But I'm really excited about where we are as a community coming out of whatever phrase you want to do related to COVID, right? I mean, realizing COVID is just part of our lives and how to live through COVID. It's really exciting about what is possible. And this budget, I think, lays it out. With that.
And actually, just one coda on to what all that Jeff was talking about. I noticed up on the slide, it said for temporary employees, 8.2 FTE equivalent. And just to be aware, the way the operation runs is that 8.2 FTE could be the equivalent of 10 times as many temporary employees. And so even though you might think of, oh, it's it's the equivalent of 8, no, it's everywhere throughout the city, all the after school sites and sports sites. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. If you could advance the slide, and then going on to the Violence Prevention Partnership.
And a quick question, Jeff. Are we allowed to do questions in between or?
Yeah, I think because I have questions and if we go into violence, I know, I'm sorry. But go ahead.
So you mentioned the partnership with Burbank Housing. Are each of the schools also contributing, like donating the space and those elements of that as a part of these program offerings? Or are we paying for that?
No, yeah. So in most cases, the schools are partnering with us. And so, yeah, we're able to offer a lot more.
So what
is sometimes one of those complications of expanding the programming.
Right. And I mean, I know we don't have our own indoor basketball facilities yet. Whoever's working on the Hearn facility, let's get those taken. So one of the challenges I think that we had in the last few years in articulating our benefits for this tax is just how much additional impact it has as this tax then spurs other organizations to put more back into our community. So that's Burbank Housing providing the space for the after school programs, the schools providing the space. All those are a monetary, a resource use contribution that we should be able to quantify. And I think as we're looking at 20 years from now and being able to communicate each year, but also in 20 years to the community what the value was that came from this extra tax. It's also a part of that story is how many other resources were used, and finding a way to create a ratio or to account at this stage with 20 years to go for that and actually be able to add it up and have it quantifiable is going to be really important for us. Because each year conveying that's important. The community should know that because of this special tax, they're getting this much more in resources from all these other places. But then also when we have to go back out and make the decision of whether to renew or not, we want to know what this truly meant. And so I think it would be really helpful, and I'll probably say this at every single meeting, so if you want me to not say it at every meeting, is if we can put on the slide, you know, we estimate the value of the rents from the school districts to be we estimate the value of Burbank Housing's donation of facilities to be. And then we can add it up. I'll add it up in a spreadsheet if I need to, but I'm sure someone here has a better program to do that in. And then we can actually say, so, you know, you did a quarter cent, but that quarter cent had the same value as if it was 3/4 of a cent. I will only repeat that a few more times today, but thank you.
Does anyone else have a question? Okay, we'll let you go. Okay.
Right.
All right, so moving on with the Violence Prevention Partnership, if you could advance the slide, please. So on the other side of the coin, with the Violence Prevention Partnership, being focused on community outreach and the Choice Grant Program, you see relatively lower salaries going on because they don't have the temporary employees in the field. What you do see as we move down is the Choice Grant Program, which includes the 35% of the Youth Services Metro money or public safety tax money coming in. And in this case, there's also money for a grant evaluator on top of that. The services and supplies has the operating supplies, obviously, to support the program, as well as some community outreach programming included. And so if you want to advance the slide,
all right.
I will let Danielle take the program.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Garduno. I'm the interim program manager for the Violence Prevention Partnership. And as I was sitting here waiting my turn, I realized I left myself off of this particular slide. So I'll go over this and let you know that we're missing a staff position up here. So staff under the public safety sales tax measure include for violence prevention include a full-time program manager position, which we are in the process of hiring for. A city manager should be making final decisions by tomorrow or early next week. So just waiting on that announcement. In addition to that, my position, my regular position is the Choice Program Analyst, so administrative analyst, which is in charge of overseeing the Choice Grant Program as well as the mini grant program, which I inadvertently left out on the screen. We also have two community outreach specialist positions. One is our free outreach and mediation position, also working on that awareness piece that Jason mentioned. The other position is a wraparound coordinator position. This is fully funded through Sonoma County Probation to implement the Guiding People Successfully referral program. So that position is not paid to the sales tax. We are reimbursed for that. And then finally, our senior administrative assistant to keep our team afloat and provide us with anything that we need and help supporting our many engagement events that we do. In addition to that, we're in the process of hiring for a temporary community outreach specialist position through our PG&E funding to help support the other community outreach specialist position, particularly getting our community awareness campaign back up off the ground and doing our annual violence prevention awareness seminar later this year, which I'll get into in just a moment. So the special sales tax funds for violence prevention are specifically used for conducting outreach in our schools and also street outreach. So our one community outreach specialist has been inundated over the past probably 6 to 9 months with requests from our local schools, particularly our middle schools and our high schools. These schools are asking for more help with de-escalation, conflict resolution, mediation among the students, as well as providing life skills classes for students that are identified through restorative resource specialists on campuses. So we have been able to implement the life skills class at both Roseland Accelerated Middle School in the Roseland School District, Santa Rosa Middle School, and Santa Rosa City Schools District. He is one person, and unfortunately, one person is not enough to do this work. So we are, which I'll be talking about in just a moment, looking at other funding sources to help grow our team and establish more of those types of positions. In addition to the school outreach work, we do have a crisis response protocol that we are getting back up off the ground. This protocol was actually developed in 2014 through a previous iteration of the Violence Prevention Partnership. And this is utilizing our operational team and also our staff to do a community climate assessment after there has been a critical incidence of violence in the community, such as a shooting or a stabbing or other great bodily injury that puts somebody in the hospital, particularly youth or young adult in the hospital. And so working with that crisis response team, again, to go out, do the community climate assessment to figure out what are the needs of the community, the neighbors, the neighborhood that was impacted by that incident of violence, whether it be, a full neighborhood or just a school, as well as victim support and what the victim might need. So we are working with the direction of our city manager at beginning to establish hospital-based intervention services as well, to make sure that victims of these types of incidences have the full support that they need for when they leave the hospital and re-enter into the community. The other part of the funding goes towards implementing our Choice Grant program and our Choice Mini Grant program. So currently we have 8 agencies that are being funded at $750,000 a year. The program for cycle 11 is being run from July 1st, 2022 through December 31st of 2024. So we're just wrapping up our first year of cycle 11. In addition to that, the funds also pay for an evaluator. So we have that evaluator on contract for the next 2.5 years to fully evaluate the program and its outcomes over the next 2.5 years. In addition to that, we have fully relaunched the Choice Mini Grant program, which was put on hold during the pandemic. So there's $50,000 available for that per year. And these mini grants go towards operational costs. So community-based organizations, community groups can apply for this funding to receive up to $5,000 to pay for operational costs and supplies for violence prevention programming. And finally, funding is used to go towards staffing to facilitate our policy and operational teams, as well as our multidisciplinary assessment and referral team, otherwise known as MDART. And next slide, please. I just wanted to chat a little bit with you about our next steps for the partnership. So we have a lot of work to do. As I mentioned before, we cannot prevent violence with one street outreach person. So we are taking steps to figure out how to move forward and to create a more sustainable structure for our staff as well as the partnership. We are currently in the process of updating our strategic plan and hope to have a finalized plan by July 1st of this year. We are, as I mentioned, also in the process of fully evaluating the Choice Grant program and with the hopes of utilizing that information to then update the program at the end of cycle 11. Got a couple ideas from what that might look like so far, but really trying to align it with the strategic plan, but also what the needs are as far as, our staffing, what we're doing, and then how we can complement what our staffing is doing moving forward. We're also in the process of relaunching our violence prevention awareness campaign and training program. So this includes the annual violence prevention awareness seminar that used to be held in September of every year. We should be having that back again sometime in the fall this year. Date to be determined. I'm still trying to hire a staff person to do that. And then finally, I'm working on identifying other funding sources to help us build a street outreach and school-based intervention team, a crisis response and hospital-based intervention team, and really expanding what we already have, as well as expanding our Green Spaces for All Faces program, which is a component of our Guiding People Successfully program. Real quickly, what that is, so our wraparound coordinator in the last year has created this program as an opportunity to get our youth that are being referred to us through probation out into the community, doing different experiences that they might not have ever had the opportunity to do. So we've taken them to Spring Lake and done boating with them, out to Bodega Bay to try out crabbing. They're also getting community service hours as part of their probation requirements through this program. And so we right now are only working with probation youth because of the staffing capacity and funding limitations, but we are looking at other funding sources so we can expand that to include all youth in that programming. And that is it. Thank you.
Okay.
To advance the slide.
Perfect.
Well,
Questions?
thinking about your,
I was wondering, I don't know about the PG&E money. What is that? The funding from PG&E?
The city receives settlement funds through PG&E for the wildfires.
Forgot about that. Okay,
Yeah, so we're using some of that to fund the staff position.
Great, thank you. And then, who's your grant evaluator now?
Applied Survey Research. They are part of the California Cities Violence Prevention Network. They do other evaluations for other cities doing similar violence prevention work using the results-based accountability framework that we use here.
What's the organization's name?
Applied Survey Research, or ASR.
I thought they only did homeless counts.
No. No.
Homeless counts.
Yeah.
Any additional questions?
A question?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm looking at the proposed budget. I'm looking at it and, well, two questions here. I'm wondering, I think that this was also consistent with the police. Let me check the flyer. But there's a 3.4% increase in the amount of money that the choice grants are receiving. But as you make your way up to 2028, there's only a 0.1% increase in the funding allotted to the choice grants.
right, and the reason why it shows that is that in the current year, we're overfunding choice grant programs, whereas for the purposes of the model, the cash flow model is the out years are a function of how much revenue we bring in. That cell is populated by just multiplying the revenue by 35%. But this year, we're putting in more than the 35% that has been required. And from what I've heard, that might be changing as well. So this year, so if you look from year to year, it's simply a function of what the sales tax forecast is. Basically, it grows along with the sales tax, and the finance department
Their
has to figure out
Yeah, projection.
recession, and that's how the choice grant amounts are calculated.
So if I'm hearing you correctly,
Yeah.
the choice grants, you said something about inflation, did you?
Yeah, the choice grants are just 35% of how much sales tax the youth section brings in. And so as that model goes out into the out years, if the finance department thinks we're gonna collect more sales tax, then that amount for choice grants goes up. But as well, if we're forecasting a recession, then the amount might show going down simply because it's what we do as a function of sales tax.
Now, in the same span of time, up until 2028, there's I only calculated two, but they look about the same. So between 2024 and 2025, there's a 5% increase in the benefits. It looks like on average, there's 5% increase every year into that time. So how do you, so just when I'm comparing the benefits versus the choice grant, right? So how do you justify the 5% increase for the benefits yearly? But so how's the choice grant supposed to supposed to keep pace with inflation?
Right.
But you mentioned that, but your salary, not the salary, but the benefits are definitely with good reason.
Yeah.
Keeping, above inflation, 5.5%. So can you share that?
That was trying to be optimistic about how much our benefits are going to be going up, because typically in a given year between healthcare and retirement costs, your benefits have been inflating over 5%. And so just trying to put in there a reasonable, when you start throwing out 7 or 8%, it starts seeming exceedingly high. So the 5% is a reasonable growth factor to keep us in line so that we don't start overspending when we know we're going to have a much higher benefit cost.
Well, with a 0.1% increase with everything that the choice grant does in a span of a 5-year period, you go from 914,000, 915,000. So, that 915,000 is not really 915,000 at the end of those, is going to be lower.
Possibly.
So one of the things that I would want to remind you is that these out years it's not budget, it's a plan. So it's given what we know now and some waiters that we'll put in, it kind of shows us a roadmap of where we may be. And we could adjust in ways in order to better fund that. Now, it's within the amount of money that comes in, right? So the allocation doesn't change. There's a certain amount of money that comes in from sales tax. It's going to be from our projections of what we think that the sales tax is going to come in. But even at that, we are adjusting on a year by year basis what we're thinking our next year revenue amount is going to be. So it is absolutely great to point these things out now, and there are red flags that we need to put up, that we need to look at. But I would just caution that when we're looking 4 or 5 years down the road, that all those numbers are going to change. The benefit amounts may be way more or less.
Thank you for sharing that. I get that it's a prediction, but you're making a pretty clear statement when you're dropping the funding for the choice programs over a 5-year period, because if you're not increasing, then it's dropping. So that makes a statement.
But it's a projection. It's an estimate.
Regardless if it's a projection, it still makes it still brings a point across as if out of these 5 years, we're choosing not to increase the funding for all these programs.
Can I ask a question within this line?
Okay.
What is the typical commitment length-wise we give to an organization for a choice grant?
2 years.
2 years?
Yep.
And is that staggered or is it 2-year, everything's in a 2-year cycle?
Everything's a 2-year cycle. This was just a little different. We did 2.5 because we weren't sure if the sales tax measure was going to pass.
And sitting here at the beginning of Measure H, they had heard rumors of a discussion about potentially returning the tattoo removal program and other things like that. Is there a policy discussion I'll be heading to a non-citizens oversight committee around potentially changing how this budget is allocated amongst grants and permanent programs to meet these needs? I mean, could there be future policy decisions that'll be made by the council that would change these allocations that we'd be looking at, say, in 12 months? I mean, you're not a director. Sorry to ask you that. Someone wants to just say to me, yes, of course, there's a policy discussion that could be had.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. When I'm saying that, I think to articulate that, I'm worried that we're looking at a projection at the beginning of Measure H that's presuming the policy discussion, that's presuming any direction that we would go with the policy discussion that the council hasn't had yet. Because we're looking at 20 years of revenue, whereas last year we were looking at 30. And so I think to go in the direction that you were going, there's an important statement to be made by the city. And I hope the council makes that statement. And maybe we should make sure to be cautious in the framing of this budget as being before that policy discussion has occurred.
Absolute perfect points, very valid. And I think that, our implementation plan the way we present it has evolved over the years. This made sense the way that we have it now as we were winding down the tax as we were getting closer to 2024. Now that we've extended it out that 20 years, showing it in this way doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I would prefer that we go back to where we are looking at things on a more annual basis that allows, the points that you're making, that we are not presupposing, through function of spreadsheet formulas, what policy may be there in the future. So that's the only reason, Member Atkinson, why I'm not as concerned with the out years as you would be, and I totally understand why you are. For me, I look at that as I'm actually looking more at the bottom line of how the fund is going to survive over a certain period. And even at that, I know that bottom line could change because it could be a more robust sales tax driven economy that helps even more, or it could be hurt as we've had back in the recession. We're not really forecasting a recession. We are looking at a rather steady growth period going out of tax coming in. But your point is correct. We do have salary and benefits and other type of costs that may go at a higher rate than the revenue that's coming in at our 3% model or 4%, whatever it may be. Those are things that we have to look at all over the city, right? That's a challenge that we have. Again, this is kind of a roadmap. It doesn't diminish the fact that yes, if the council wants to put more money toward choice grants or less, that's a decision that the council is going to make and is going to direct the departments to do that. And you're going to see that as a part of the budget, as long as we stay within the permissible uses that are identified in the ordinance. So, if that helps at all.
So quick question. So will we be going back to just looking at it annually because you stated it was based on it finishing out? So are we going to go back to that yearly, we're going to deal with just 1 year?
Right.
Okay.
I think
instead of doing 5 years, because
what I would say is there's what I would like to do and what I need to double check with the city attorney's office and what we can actually do. And it may mean that we need to take an item to council and say, hey, this is how we're going to do it. And I would need to probably get either most things with this tax requires 6 votes of council. So we'd need to lay out why we would want to do that, the rationale behind it. And if we had that, then we would.
So we have some of the rationale here.
Especially if the committee is saying this is the way that we would like to see the implementation plan. And we're not prepared for this agenda to ask that question and get that direction from the committee. But obviously, if we go to council with the committee saying, this is how we would like to see the implementation plan presented as part of the budget going forward, then that carries a whole heck of a lot more weight than Alan coming up there and saying, hey, here's what we should do, because.
Now, would that have to be a vote, or we can just say, hey, we would prefer to see it?
We would want to agendize that, I believe,
Okay.
as I'm getting the.
Yes, we would like that on.
We would want to agendize it. So probably the next time around that we're in front of you, you would see that on the agenda, and we would have it planned out.
So for our purposes today, fiscal year 23-24 is what we are reviewing and saying this is or is not within the confines of Measure H.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Can I ask another question? My recollection back when when it was Measure O, that it was the department's recommendation that it was a 35 of the 20% that Recreation and Parks got, 20% of that, 35% of that was going to go to the Choice Grant Program. And so would that be a department recommendation again, if you want to change in that would go to council to ask for permission, or can they, I guess it would have to, because it's a budget change. you'd have to ask at council for that. Because I'm hearing that that's a possibility somewhere.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to.
Or is that part of the ordinance with the breakdowns what's in the
not in the
ordinance?
ordinance.
It's
Not codified that way, so that makes it more of a policy decision on how it's going to happen.
Okay. But the council overall approves the budget anyway, and so it would be a recommendation by the department. Okay. Thank you.
Can we also have an update on that in the next meeting?
Yes.
And just one other thing is I noticed that there's a lot of money that is in, which is great to see money in the, I forget what we call it, it's the extra money that we have.
The reserves.
Thank you. Fund balance. And so fund balance is something that might be able to help with some of this too, and evening things out. I was thinking about what you said, Manta, in terms of the difference between what the salary is and the benefits all going up. I mean, you could see in the long run that could be that we have lots of people working, but they can't do anything with it because it's all salary and it's nothing for anybody else. But I think that there's fund balance too, and that all gets worked on.
So
every
essentially,
year.
don't touch the programming dollars, find that from somewhere else.
Yeah, well, I think that what Alan was saying is that we have to balance that every time. We have to figure that out. How do we keep programming going? And the departments are always looking at that. I know you are. So it's not a shell
I
game.
actually have a fund balance question off that. So I know when we're looking at the police and fire budgets, a lot of times the fund balance is going up because we're anticipating equipment or facility expenses. For the purposes of this budget, we have over $1 million in the fund balance, projecting half of that in 5 years. Is it purely programming that we're anticipating by having the additional funds in the fund balance and making sure we're able to level out as Alan was saying, or are there other expenses that are being anticipated similar to the other two departments that we tend to look at?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, I mean, it's a function of programming and the staff to be able to manage that programming and carry it out. That's what we do. We have a starting fund balance, right? It's kind of laid out in that we have the starting amount, you have your revenue in, and then you separate out all of your expenditures. If you're running a deficit and that your expenditures are more than your revenues coming in, your fund balance is going to decrease. And then conversely, if you hold back your expenditures to an amount either equal or less than your revenues coming in, your fund balance is going to increase. Mm-hmm. So what I would say is that it is a function of your expenditures in total in the fund and of how your fund balance is going to be at the end of the given year. So as I look at this at the end, I'm seeing that we're running a bit of a structural deficit. Again, it's out in the out years, so there are things that could affect that. But that's where you're seeing.
And I guess my question is, within that consideration, with the other departments we see, oftentimes will hold back, build up the fund balance for a larger anticipated expense.
Yeah.
Within this budget, is there something that you're looking at where holding back to build up a fund balance would be important? I don't know if there's capital expenses that are explicitly authorized in here, but for instance, basketball facilities. Could that be something where we're holding back funds within this, where you would decide to hold back funds to build up in order to have?
So I would let the department respond to that, but what I think they're going to say is, well, have fun.
The reserve that is there is not being done for something, right? We're trying to build a fire station. Okay. That is not being held for a strategic reason for a big purchase. I think ultimately part of the reason it's built up the way that it has is because I think we all expected COVID to go a lot differently than the actuals. And so you're finding out mid-year, late in the year that, oh, wow, this was, so much higher. Not only did it not go down, it went up. And so then you quickly had a lot of money showing up, which on the programming side, you can't snap your fingers and spend that money, right? I mean, so I think that's an element of why it's built up. It's not a strategic, we're building it up for a purpose. It was we thought we were going down. We were actually worried about like, hey, this year we're good, but next year is there going to be enough on this, running at a deficit to keep programs open? And then all of a sudden it was, oh no, we're putting more money into it. So
Yeah, the tax revenue just really kept coming in during COVID that surprised all of us.
But yeah, there was, as we were heading to COVID, there was a year that we looked at it and there was those future year forecast was, ooh, are we going to have to start looking at, do we cut we went through that with the recession as well. And we had a reserve at that time as well that kept the doors open. And we didn't close a program through the recession because of that. And so essentially that's what happened. We thought we were in that mode and instead we got more money.
Thank you.
I appreciate being very strategic in doing that because, it would be very difficult if certain things are taken out of the community because funding is gone. So I appreciate, being, strategic in that move.
And on a programming side, maybe not everyone agrees with me. I believe, right? I mean, you take a look at a program as you're building it. I don't evaluate a program in terms of success or not until year 3, because a program is something that, especially like youth programming, it's something that builds up, right? The middle school soccer, right? From the first year of how many schools can we get on board to 2 teams at every school. That's over a few years. And so to say, ooh, funding's up and let's throw it out into a new program. If that funding isn't still there in 3 years, you didn't even get to the point to see if the program was good or not. So making sure that you've got enough of that. Programming is very difficult with an unpredictable funding source, right? So fortunately, it doesn't go right. It goes to that fund balance and it allows us that flexibility to gauge and grow at an appropriate rate instead of saying, well, we've got to use the money, so we have to do A, B, or C and not having that strategic plan.
And I saw your hand. You're good. Does anyone else have a question?
I had a question.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask, well, thank you so much for all the amazing work y'all are doing.
Thank you.
The programs, because, we see the kids out there playing over there in Comstown, so they're having a lot of fun. So big ups to y'all for the amazing work. I just had a question. Are you all doing anything differently with the funding that takes into consideration the additional permissible uses you're able to do it? Or I know it's just started, so you may not have a time to talk with your staff about that, but.
It just started, I will say, going through that process and seeing that language being added in. I don't think that necessarily impacted our section of the measure as much as others. We've had, mental health was one of those big things, right? And a lot of that was the community, making sure that in response program, which, we won't jump that far ahead. But we've had mental health services through the grants and through some of those things. So in a lot of ways, I don't think that opened a new door for us. Okay. Those were things that we were already doing in a lot of cases, because again, I bragged about how fortunate we are with this funding source, that it's not your typical funding source that says you have to fit in this house. Right. I mean, I talked to you guys through COVID of nowhere in there did it say run a distance learning school. Right. But nowhere in it did it. There was nothing that said you can't do that. Right. So we had that flexibility with ours. And I would say that it didn't change too much of how we look at how we can spend the money. Because again, it was more of, are these services going to impacted youth and those types of things. And so I didn't see it change it much for us.
Okay, great. What I would offer is I have seen like a lot of mental health groups pop up that do interactive activities with youth, especially like outside or some type of even like Jeopardy game, so now the fact that you can use it on mental health resources, I just wanted to throw that out there and offer that.
Yeah, and definitely, I kind of mentioned on one of the slides, we had things like the Girls Circle and STEM programming. It's, again, those things we're always looking to, makes our job a little bit easier, makes our programs better. So any resources you have, always feel free to research us. Collaborations and those things are, just maximizes what we could do with this resource. So.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now for my questions. So the first one, I know you mentioned earlier that a percentage of money comes from the general fund. Do you happen to know what that is that runs the NSP, the neighborhood services?
I don't know. And it's what it is. Originally, it was the dollar amount when Measure O started. Okay. And then when they did a revision, I don't remember which year they did that. After the recession, they realized that's kind of a dangerous way to set it up, because you then have negative impacts you don't foresee in other parts of the city because you can't cut across the board. So it switched to what the percentage of the general fund. So the amount of money we had in neighborhood services what that percentage of the general fund was then, we have to maintain that percentage. And I don't know if the finance people know that off the top of their head. They have a lot of numbers in their head or have it written there, but
Somewhere, but I want to say it's around 0.4% for violence prevention, 0.4% of the total general fund budget. So if our total general fund budget is around 200 million, it's about, what is that, $40,000, I think. I'll try to find it.
Okay.
I think has a few decimal points after that.
But that's how it works is what the percent, when this all started, what was neighborhood services percentage of the general fund and maintaining that.
Okay. Then my next question is, you mentioned that there's a possibility that you're going to have a school site where you can run 2 different programs. So would that be ran simultaneously or different times of the day?
Yeah, so that's for the summer recreation sensation program, which is kind of the all day summer site. So it would be essentially, instead of, if we can't locate 4 schools, we can only get 3 schools. One of those schools, we may be able to get enough classroom space and resources that we can run essentially 220 to 240 kids there instead of 100 to 120 kids there.
And then also, I know one of the things I'm hearing in the community is having some like later in the day activities. Is that something that you're looking at? Between 5 and, I don't know, 8 or something.
Yeah, I would point to most of those, again, the out of school time is generally that summer and then generally till about 6. But the extracurricular activities, the majority of those run later into a lot of our sports programs and stuff are programmed for into 8, 9 o'clock, depending on the age group and stuff. So a lot of these programs, are running later as well. To me, a big success of, I mentioned going to the flag football. It's great to see the kids, but to turn and see all the parents and the families in the stands and know that, again, it's always great to give a kid a safe place to be. But when you're creating those memories for the families and those opportunities to bond and stuff, that's always special to me. So we definitely look at that of, we want to take care of the kids when the parents can't be there, but we also want to provide opportunities when the family's together. So.
Yeah, I wrote down, I appreciate that effort of including the whole family, that whole family approach. And so I had wrote that down. So thank you for thinking about the whole family approach. And then also you mentioned that you were serving about 180 to 200 middle schoolers. And so are you getting back to serving that population or?
Right, that is what the middle school soccer program had built up to. I don't remember the exact year that fell off.
Okay.
But
so now you're in rebuilding mode.
It's going to be the first year. Yeah, we're looking to bring that back. It's in the budget to bring back this next year. There'll be a spring program. And so can we get every school on board the first year? Do we have enough transportation to take the kids and they're playing the other schools every single week where they're like, hey, I want to be a part of that? Is it a tournament at the end of the year? There's a lot of things for us to still figure out exactly this year. But yeah, that we're going to run a program this year and it's going to build up. And the vision is, hey, can we have 3 schools at 3 teams at every single school and have, 60 middle schoolers per school? Let's do it, right? I mean, so the goal is to build back up to that type of program.
And then my last question is in regards to our in-house STEM person. I know last time you mentioned that you were going to do the STEM program. So I just wanted to see an update about that. How did it go, or, how did it work out?
Yeah, it was good. We've been doing it, again, it's not a standalone program. We've been doing it through the after-school programs. And I'm going to blank on the name of the group again because I always do. I should have written it down. They came out to the sites. The kids enjoy. There's a few of those enrichment things that we've done. One of our staff brought out Fitness Wednesday or something. They were doing things like yoga and stuff with the kids, right? So all sorts of those different elements that are just kind of not the same day. It's not just come and grab snack and do your homework and hang out. It's, adding those elements in. So we're always looking for those collaborations that make the programs more fun for the kids. But no, a lot of good feedback and a relationship we look to continue and hopefully expand on. And one of the big vision goals that we have is to not stop there, not just with STEM, but with all sorts of things is how do we then, once we're exposing the kids to these things, I think the next step of that is how do we build into, okay, we've exposed it to them. How do we give them additional opportunities beyond what we can do expose, right? Our staff are trying to do a lot of different things here. We're not going to be the masters of all. So building in ways to, if recreation is providing a Lego engineering camp that is a couple $100 a week and it's offered through an instructor and stuff, right? We have less control over that. Well, what are ways that we can now engage these kids into those activities as well? So there's a lot of opportunity and we're constantly, but it's going well. And like that middle school soccer or any of the programs, right? It's that growth. And so that's some of the ideas we're looking to grow it in the future.
And my last comment is you mentioned, I would like to see maybe some verbiage going out to the community about we didn't take anything away, we added. So you mentioned we added more classes and more additional. So if we have some messaging going back out to the community, hey, this is what we ended up doing. We didn't take anything away. We actually added. So having that going back out into the community so they can see, hey, our hard, tax dollars is at work. I would like to see something like that. If nothing else. Yes.
Just to answer your question really quickly, we have about $820,000 in general fund money for the neighborhood services maintenance effort.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next.
Can we go to the next slide? So, good evening, Chair Minor and our Oversight Committee. I'm John Cregan. I'm our Santa Rosa Chief of Police. And if we go to the next slide, I'll start going through the numbers here for us. So the first, we'll dive into some of our proposed budget, and I'll highlight just some of the significant changes there. You see some of the changes with salary and benefits, so I'm going to outline those in the upcoming slides. What that does is adding one full-time employee position that's going to be funded by Measure O, and that also captures the cost of living raise adjustment that's becoming this July 1st, which is part of the current contract for the other 16 positions that are funded with Measure O. The services and supplies is going to go up slightly, and that's going to go to one of the other things we're talking about too, is outfitting the new Roseland substation that we're working on. It's going to be some of the equipment and supplies going into that new substation. The administration costs actually went down slightly. And then the downtown enforcement lease. So we lease a substation here right offside of the transit mall, so we can have a visible presence downtown and a quicker deployment of our downtown enforcement team and work really closely with our transit staff there at the Transit Operations Center. And then the biggest expenditure, which really takes the chunk of these changes, is allocating some funds to do one of our most exciting things that we're going to be doing with the public safety tax, which is purchasing a building in the Roseland neighborhood off of Sebastopol Road. To be able to have a visible presence with our police department in Sebastopol, in the Roseland area. So those are the significant changes that are coming with the proposed budget. And if we go to the next slide, I'll start highlighting some of the things that we're doing with that. So the biggest one that we're adding here is the full-time employee position, and this will be a police sergeant position. And the sergeant is a first-line supervisor who supervises the team. It's one of the more critical staff members that we have in our organization. And we had for many years a gang crime team here in the city of Santa Rosa. I sat on detective for 5 years and later served as a sergeant of that gang crime team. And we had at one point when I was on the team, we had 7 gang detectives and a sergeant that were on that team and really worked closely. And one of the things I want to stress today that the gang crimes team is not all about enforcement and putting gang members in jail, but a key part of that team is the prevention and intervention. And that was our key liaison to the Violence Prevention Partnership, to many of our community-based organizations. It really had a focus. And when I was on the gang team with Chief Navarro at the time was my supervisor, launched the GREAT program for the schools for the gang resistance education and training, and really worked with a lot of the other neighborhood organizations on that. So in 2019, due to some significant staffing issues at the police department, Chief Navarro at the time eliminated our gang crimes team, and we're really feeling the impacts. And those are some of the things that we're going to talk about today. In 2022, we actually set the record for the history of Santa Rosa for the most homicides ever in our city's history. So that's a startling number for us, and it's something that we're looking internally about how do we make some of those changes. And we had 12 homicides, 7 of those involved a firearm. We had 421 shootings reported to the police department in 2022. And we also saw a lot of guns on the streets of Santa Rosa. Our officer sees 236 illegal guns on the streets of Santa Rosa. 74 of those were ghost guns or these personally manufactured firearms. And so we're seeing a lot of this, and not every one of those has a gang nexus or connection to it, but many of them do. So it's one of the things as I stepped into the role of chief, wanted to see like what we could do to bring that back and start having a closer partnership with the Violence Prevention Partnership. So we want to bring back this gang sergeant position, and I'm going to work internally with my own staffing as we're doing a lot better with our recruitment efforts to find staff and allocate my own staff to fund the detective positions out of there, and I'll find it within my own budget for that. Then one of my key, as I stepped into the role of chief, I'm coming up just on my 1 year right now in May 2nd with it. And one of the key things that I wanted to move was to actually have a more visible presence in Roseland. And quite honestly, we haven't achieved all our promises that we made when we annexed Roseland in 2017 from the police department's side of that. So I wanted to have a more visible presence. I've spoken to many community members in Roseland who have asked for that, to have more officers in the area, being more engaged in the community, making more of a presence, addressing some of the safety concerns. And one of the key ways for me to do that is to actually have a facility there, a building where officers can be able to write reports and book evidence, eat lunch, and ultimately what I want to do is have a space that we could have community meetings there where people don't have to come across town to either go to the Finley Center or the police department, that we can do it right there in Roseland. We can have operational briefings there. And my long-term goal is to be able to actually have staff there, to be able to have a public lobby where we could have bilingual and bicultural staff members that could address community concerns. You could file reports. You could be able to access getting whether you need information or other reports and things like that. So that's what we're working toward. But the first step is to find a facility. And so we have a long-term plan, and we're still in the early stages of that. We've looked at literally dozens of sites on Sebastopol Road, and I walked with Councilmember Alvarez. We walked from one end of Sebastopol to the other and contacted many business owners and looked at a lot of different facilities. So we're narrowing down on purchasing a site right now, and we have some long-term plans for that building, and we're going to look at leasing another spot in the meantime until we can finalize this other spot. So that's what some of these costs right here is. Not only is we're setting aside this money, and right now we set like the allocated cost of the 2.6 million, which is expensive, but we're looking at some different places that are going to cost some money, but that's just a total. We're hoping to be able to drive that cost down a little bit. And then also for the 87,000 is for the lease, some of the move-in costs of the place that we have identified there on Sebastopol Road for a temporary lease, and to make some small improvements to that lease space. So those are that, especially the 2.6 for the substation, take up obviously the biggest chunk of that 3.1 million. If we go to the next slide, please. We'll start breaking down the actual positions. So the positions that we would have now as a proposed budget would be 17 full-time employee positions. That's with the addition of the gang sergeant position. And one that we were really excited about last year that we did, and that was feedback from the Oversight Committee about adding the student intern position. So we'll continue to fund those. So the breakdown here, we have the one police lieutenant. That lieutenant runs like our special events and our traffic and our downtown enforcement team. And the special events is a very big job with like the country summer, the fairgrounds, and literally every weekend there's some type of event, whether it be at Courthouse Square or at the fairgrounds or other community areas. The two sergeant positions, one's one of our traffic sergeants and the other is a sergeant of our downtown enforcement team. And the downtown enforcement team obviously focuses downtown, but really has a bigger scope of the entire city of Santa Rosa and really works for some of our homeless related issues and really helps to be able to help get some of our unsheltered members of our community into shelter, and works closely with Catholic Charities and our other community-based organizations here in Santa Rosa. The 5 police officer positions, those are allocated. 5 are allocated to patrol, and they really help with some of the big emergencies of responding to calls, increasing our response time to 911 emergencies, helping with fire evacuations, sideshows, and a host of so many other things. The other 4 positions, 2 are motorcycle officers assigned to our traffic team and are assisting with fatal collisions, with traffic enforcement, and addressing just neighborhood concerns related to traffic enforcement. And the other final 2 are with our downtown enforcement team, which I spoke about. The field evidence technician, these are civilian positions, and they process crime scenes. So as we saw, the 421 shootings and the 12 homicides, every single one of those, a field evidence tech comes in with a much greater expertise than a police officer, processes all those scenes, collects shell casings, blood evidence, DNA, and make sure that we have a solid case going for the court, and that any criminal defendant has evidence that was collected in a very appropriate manner for their criminal proceedings. The next position is the community service officer, and this is another civilian position. And the community service officer takes like non-injury collisions of no suspect burglary reports, does parking citations, and things like that to take those off the plate of the officers. And the community really enjoys being able to engage with our community service officers. They also come out and help with some of our community engagement outreach events. Our 2 community outreach student interns. So we love these positions. They both work 20 hours hours a week. And they're doing things, they're working with our social media team. They're going out to special events like at Courthouse Square when we set up a booth with a table. They're passing out flyers, they're going to different community events. And it's been really a rewarding experience for the students to get to learn a little more about the police department and to be able to work out in our community and really assist us in some of the things that Measure O was designed for, was getting out our community and doing things that maybe we wouldn't have the staff allocation to be able to do before. On the other side of the house in our technical services division, we have one of our communication dispatchers. That's a dispatch supervisor, and they're running our 911 dispatch center and making sure that we're answering the calls properly and quickly. And then for major events, they help manage those within our dispatch center. And then a police technician, and the police technicians work. Last year, we took over 15,000 police reports at the police department, and they help manage all of that data, make sure that we're following some of the federally required things of tracking the data and the demographics and the crimes, and be able to do one of the huge things they were a part of this year is transitioning over to NIBRS, which is the new federal requirement, which breaks down crimes in much greater detail than we've seen in generations before. So that's the breakdown of the 17 full-time employee positions and the 2 student intern positions, which are all funded through our public safety tax. Next slide, please. So here we talk about some of the enhancements that we've done through the public safety tax. And we've talked about that with the downtown enforcement team, our patrol officers and our traffic officers, really being able to put an increased focus. Downtown, Railroad Square, specifically, we're really excited to add Roseland to the new public safety tax, the Prince Memorial Greenway, and the smart railways, which we've seen lots of problems over the year. We really focused on having an increased response to our homeless response throughout the city, and are really excited to be able to see more people engaging with some of the services, not only with our safe parking program, but with our partnership with Catholic Charities and Sam Jones. We have public safety beds, and our downtown enforcement team works very closely to be able to immediately get people in the shelters. And we've been excited to some of the progress they've been able to make throughout the city. We really had a focus on some of the RVs across the city this year, and we were really getting a lot of community concerns about some of the dangers associated with these. And so the focus has been helping these individuals get into our safe parking program, get in the services, and ultimately, if there were service resistant and the vehicle wasn't following the guidelines of the law, those vehicles were getting impounded and taken off the streets of Santa Rosa. Community engagement and outreach, and that's been a collaborative effort between our officers, our civilian employees, and our 2 student interns. Increasing traffic safety. We had 8 fatal collisions in Santa Rosa last year. So that's something that's really important to me, to put more of these traffic resources out here, investigating some of these collisions, but really trying to work with the upstream approach of having the visible presence in our community. So hopefully we can drive down some of these fatal collisions and serious injury collisions in 2023. And then also, one thing that we've had lots of conversations with the Oversight Committee before is our response times. And unfortunately, we've seen a creep up and up and up with our response times. And we've always tried to see our response times under 6 minutes into our priority 1 call. So that means if you're calling 911 and you have a true emergency going on, our goal is to get there within 6 minutes. Unfortunately, last year in 2021, we were at 7 minutes and 3 seconds. And in 2022, it crept up to 7 minutes and 7 seconds. So it's going the wrong direction. So it's some of the things that I'm working as chief about as we examine the resources that we're allocating throughout the city and what we can do, because we all know the city's continuing to grow. And so my job is to be able to manage our resources better so we can get to those calls quicker, because 7 minutes and 7 seconds is a long time when you're waiting for a true emergency and you're waiting for an officer to be able to respond to that call. Next slide, please. All right, I know I went through that really quickly, but I want to take any questions that we can get from the group.
Go ahead.
Yeah, first off, thank you, Chief. For both of our chiefs, your presence at the Cesar Chavez Day Festival and having all the equipment out and everything like that was greatly appreciated. The kids loved it. I guess first a quick technical question. So the expenditure for the Sebastopol Road station, the 2.6 million, that would be considered like a one-time expenditure being made out of this year's budget, but could actually end up occurring in a different year?
Correct. I do expect it to be able to spend this money this fiscal year so that we would do in this thing, we would make the one-time purchase of a facility and be able to do that. And we already have a plan in place for some of the facility costs to go under the city's general facility cost.
And there were funds, I believe, allocated in last year's budget from the general fund, I think, for this type of a project or from another fund. I think it was $1 million. Is that rolling into this, or is this kind of replacing that allocation?
We would be completely purchasing the facility using the Measure O funds. And we've met as a city team and really have thought about, this is exactly what Measure O was designed for, to be able to make these enhancements to our community, to have more of a community presence in those areas. So we felt that it truly met the definition of what Measure O was for, our new public safety tax. And so that's where we decided to use those funds.
And you had mentioned, and I couldn't agree more with that statement for sure, especially considering the Measure H language around specifically serving the Sebastopol Road corridor. You had mentioned the response time issue that's been a growing issue. Is also, I'd say, front and center for the Measure H approval was response times. It was certainly, I think, the top issue that we heard from the community about. How do you see this facility impacting that specific issue?
So the short term is that we'll have officers that are going to be there. Like, so there, instead of right now, if you're assigned, that's beat 7 and beat 5 that are over there in that southwest corridor. So right now, if they have to book evidence, turn in a report, they have to come in, even eat lunch and things like that, they're driving all the way back to the Santa Rosa main here on 965 Sonoma. And if there's an emergency call, they have to race back over there. So I don't want that. I want them staying in that neighborhood, being more visible. And it was very important to me to be able to find a building that was visible from Sebastopol Road. So when you're driving out Sebastopol Road, that you see 2 or 3 police cars parked out there. There's a big sign out there that says Santa Rosa Police Substation. So everyone in the community knows we're there and the officers are there. And if they have any issues, they can just come knock on the door. They can be able to access the officers there. So the short answer to that is they're going to be more visible there in that community and be able to have a shorter response time. So if there's a call at Matote Village, they're going to be there within seconds as opposed to driving across the whole city, and then also just have more community access. And our goal is phase 1 to have officers stationed there, and we won't have a public facing lobby. Phase 2 is that we have a public facing lobby, people come in, and then no matter what, we're going to work of having like a phone out front of there that if there's an officer not there, they're out deployed on calls, then you better pick up that phone and it would ring into our dispatch center. So it'd be an easier way to access, be able to make free calls, then ring directly into our dispatch center, and they could be able to allocate officers to that area.
And when you're making these statements of reducing the call times, that's not just because we're looking at it and we're applying common sense, but we also have the northeast or northwest station. And so you've actually looked at the data from how the response times are off of the northwest station and applying that to this analysis?
Yeah, so we've had that, and I worked our Beat 3 back there in our substation for many years and was deployed out of that. And that came from a homicide right there to 7-Eleven next door to, and seeing a lot of the gang and violence that we saw in Apple Valley and Northwest. So we had that substation and saw the immediate results of being able, community members being able to access the officers easier and for officers to be able to deploy quickly to those neighborhoods. Now we've lost that substation. We have another one over on Guerneville Road, but we've seen great results in that corridor. So we want to replicate that in the Roseland neighborhood. But what was really important to us is to have a more visible substation. And that's where I'm excited to think that we're going to be able to finalize as we work to finalize our location.
Excellent. Well, and thank you. Those are my questions. I just want to say I couldn't be happier to have this measure approved in November and to come into our first meeting and see such a significant expenditure that's so on point to the very things we were talking about throughout the campaign. So I think that this is speaking directly to the new inclusion of the Sebastopol Road area as a geographic focus, similar to the downtown station. It's speaking directly to our response time issue, which was the top issue that I heard from the community during the campaign. I think this is one of the clearest statements that we could see from the city of how seriously the entire conversation about Measure H was. And I hope that that resonates with the community, that they see that we heard them. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I think it's a big step for the police department to show we care about the Roseland community. We're committed to fulfilling the promises we made when we annexed the Roseland area.
Any additional questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation and looks like y'all starting up a lot of great stuff with this funding that's coming through. I want to ask, similar to the last question I asked, it's kind of twofold, but in regards to like one of the additional permissible uses for funding mental health response teams, was there anything, any type of funding or assistance that we were gonna use Measure O or public safety funding for assisting the in-response team or anything like that?
We did very strategically, and that was consulting with our city exec staff team, add the in response as one of the permissible uses. Right now for this year's funding, we have funding already that we got a $1.1 million federal earmark, and we also have some ARPA money from the American Rescue Plan Act that's funding it through the end of 25 into 2026 when those ARPA funds exhausted. But I think that's where we'll be looking toward the future of that, is that in response will very easily, maybe possibly get some funding from this. And I think, but we want to exhaust those free federal funds first that we have, but that's certainly going to be the future. And that's why we very strategically put it in there, because it's really important to me at the police department, our city manager and our city council, that in response is here to stay for future generations.
That's really great. I do just want to be honest. It is troubling to hear that we're going to be waiting to use these funds on mental health once other sources run out. But that's okay. It sounds like, you have a really good plan. So that's great. That's great. I'm glad to hear that it's something that y'all were discussing and stuff like that. And then a second thing, just in regards to the new like gangs teams, it was called over there on the PowerPoint. I know you all had recently initiated, was it like a special?
So we do have a team called the Special Enforcement Team, and they're not a gang team, but they've been focused on some of the violence reduction efforts and have really actually many of these guns that were seized off the streets of the Santa Rosa. But it's very uniquely different than a gang crimes team. The gang crimes teams will be more of a detective level work in investigating violent crimes that occur, whether it be gang shootings or homicides. And then that other component is going to be really focused more on the prevention and intervention of, I'd love to see the GREAT program come back. And they go to the operational team meeting with the partnership, the policy team meeting. And so they'd be more working with the community-based organizations, which we don't see as much with the SET team.
Okay. And that's specifically for the gangs team.
Correct.
The gangs team participating in those engagement activities and some extra, like you said, detective work.
Yeah, so they're primarily detectives, but like when I was on the gang crimes team, I went every month to the operational team meeting. As a sergeant, I went to the policy team meeting, and that's exactly what we try to replicate as we did back many years ago.
Okay. And currently on that team, would it be that one sergeant?
So it would be one sergeant, and then I'm going to, within my own resources, put 4 detectives on that team. But the 4 detectives won't be paid for by Measure O. Only the sergeant position would be paid for by the public safety tax.
Okay, nice. I wanted to say in regards to the gangs team, it did, as we all know, just gangs teams, unfortunately, traditionally in the past, sometimes due to the nature of constant contact with the same individuals in a certain area. I know, and I know I usually gotta say this out loud, just in regards to, I hope that there will be like mechanisms in place that you can institute just to make sure no type of profiling and discriminatory actions take place. Because just from my own personal experience 2 years ago, I want to ask you, I don't know if you were the person I spoke to, but were you the individual that worked with like misconduct?
I wasn't, no, but we do have a professional standards team.
Yeah, your voice sounded familiar, so I don't know if you were on the phone, but I did just have I had a bad experience with someone that was in regards to a team similar to this. When I just happened to be in the wrong area at the wrong time. And it was just accused of like, hey, it's like, you need to stay out of this area. We found guns in your people's cars. We're doing the best we can. And at that time, I had my phone out and I was recording him. And he still proceeded to speak in that nature when I was recording him. And I did report it. And obviously, things went along that chain. Obviously, we don't find out what happens to those officers because obviously it's an employment-related matter. But it's just, for me, as a person on this, committee for Measure O, going to be assisting with recreating this gangs team, I just wanted to voice, I hope that some mechanisms will be put in place so that this gangs team does get to participate in gang prevention intervention alongside, the type of like racial equity training, bias training and things of that nature, because, God forbid, a team being created with Measure O took part in that type of activity, which I know you stand against, and, you will all already take part in your annual trainings and that sort, but I think just stress, I would be really happy if you stress to them, just understanding that you are that team, the members of that team are getting funding through an act that was, specifically out of a lot of violence that was occurring. So I hope that, that gets to be voiced out loud, because, rest assured, we see these in the future. I definitely see myself asking like, hey, do you know where your funding is coming from? Because it's an amazing thing, because obviously violence has increased exponentially recently. And I'm really happy to hear that you're putting focus in that.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight, and that's really important to me as chief. And some of that comes with the selection of the members who are going to be on that gang crime team. And ultimately, I'll be making that decision on who those ultimate are, and I'm going to get the right people on that team. And the Santa Rosa gang team has always set itself apart. Not saying that mistakes haven't been made over the years, but set it apart as from other gang teams from across the region about treating whether it be gang members or victims or suspects with that respect. And we were able to build relationships. And actually, when I got chief of police, I had gang members who saw it on the paper, and they still have my cell phone. They called me and said, congratulations on getting chief, John, and things like that. So we were able to build some of those relationships in the community with our gang members and be able to start focusing on some of the prevention and intervention. And I'm going to make sure that this new generation of our gang team continues that. Talking about some of the implicit bias, we just finished up a few months ago that all of our sworn staff went through a 4-hour implicit bias course that we built with some of our community-based organizations here with our independent police auditor. So we just went through that, and that's so important to me to continue that. So it builds it into the culture of our organization that we're treating everyone in our community with respect and dignity and equity in every one of our contexts, and we'll continue to make sure that happens with our gang team.
I'd just like to add in that because I used to be part of the operational team, I used to lead those meetings it was a long time ago.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
You remember that, right? And my experience of the gang sergeant was that they come in as a law enforcement officer, but then they make connections with all those community members, which was really, really good, because several of them over the years, and you were one of them at one point, that was a long time ago, that, they would say, I didn't know, when I would find a family that really needed services, now I know where to send them. I know how to help them, connect them up. And that was a big change. They weren't just seeing themselves as enforcement officers. And so it has the potential to be great.
It does.
And so, and I've seen it be great. And of course, like you said, mistakes get made, but I really appreciate the tone you set with that for the community.
And so I just have one question. You mentioned the interns. Will there be any additional interns that could possibly be added to help with Measure O in some kind of capacity?
We have actually a total of 6 interns right now. So 2 are just funded through Measure O. So we have 3 that are funded through salary savings right now, because we unfortunately always have salary savings. Then 2 that are funded through Measure O, and a 6th that's funded through a grant. So there's 6 different ones. They work 20 hours a week. Their hourly wage is $20.08. So they get a decent wage for an intern coming in. And it's been a really successful program. So we're going to continue to look for opportunities to be able to expand that, because not only is it a great way for them to be able to connect with our department, but we really see it as a great recruitment tool that they get to know the department. And then we've already had one intern that's come over and joined our police technicians team. And we're hoping to get others to join dispatch, police officers, and other positions.
Okay. I don't have any further questions. Anyone else? All righty.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Oh.
I'm not seeing it as you guys are aware. I'm looking at the 40-40-20 split, and I'm looking at the revenue, and there's like the tiniest discrepancy between the 40% the fire department gets and the 40% the state department gets. Explain that.
It's interest. We do an allocation in here. So there's a small interest earning depending on what their fund balance is and how the market's doing. So we budget a small piece of that.
Thank you.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Next slide, please. Good afternoon, Chair Minor, members of the committee. My name is Scott Westrup. I'm the fire chief here in Santa Rosa. With me today is Sarah Roberts. She is our finance analyst. Sarah's been with us for about 6 months now. And so you don't have to hear me muddle through numbers anymore. I now have a numbers expert. And she knows all the brass tacks. So we'll go to the next slide and Sarah can jump into the finance and I'll come back for the operations portion.
Thank you. I just wanted to extend my gratitude to the Finance Department and Chief Westrope for their guidance and sharing all their knowledge of the special tax during the first budget preparation I've gone through this year, and also to you, to the committee, for your time. As shown on this slide, we have had a small increase in salaries of 1.7% for just about 2.3 million. And benefits has gone up about 8%, with both of that being healthcare, workers' comp, and other admin increases within benefits. Next slide, please. The other changes are that we had an increase in our E&R maintenance funding, and also an increase in our liability insurance. So our overall budget increase was about $159,000. And I'll hand it back to Chief Westrope.
So just as a refresher, and for Ethan, I'm sure you know this as well, but for the fire department's 40%, we can essentially allocate it for personnel, facilities, and special equipment. So bulk of that's in personnel. And if you recall, this essentially, as we were going from Measure O to Measure H, one of the big points I was pushing was Measure O funds essentially entire engine company. So one of our 10 fire companies that we have on duty, Measure O funds. So we have 10 FTEs in operations. We have 3 paramedic captains, 3 paramedic engineers, and 3 paramedic firefighters. The special tax also pays for our training captain that runs our training facilities and all of our programs at the training tower. In addition to the 10 FTEs in operations, it also pays a quarter of the salary for our EMS division chief, who oversees the EMS program. And as you may recall, EMS, or emergency medical services, is about 65% of what we do on a day-to-day basis. In addition to this, it pays for 9 paramedic positions on our ladder trucks. So our 2 ladder trucks all have paramedics on them via Measure O as well. Next slide, please. As far as special equipment goes, these are some of the things that we've purchased with the public safety sales tax measure. 55 dual band mobile radios, which this body approved last year, and the 8 mobile repeaters. I have to report that we're almost done with the installation of those radios. So those are the dual band radios that are in all of our equipment that allow us to talk on not only the frequencies that the fire department and EMS agencies are on, but also on law enforcement events. So if we have a event where we're working with law enforcement and unified command, we can all be on the same network. And the 8 mobile repeaters will go on to the command vehicle so we can expand our network or build in repeater sites where we need to in case of an emergency. It's purchased 2 Type 1 fire engines. There actually is a 3rd Type 1 fire engine that Measure O has purchased on order. One of 9 fire engines we have on order right now. The supply chain has killed the fire engine manufacturing industry. Normally we see just about a year to order to put a new fire engine in service, and right now it's 2 to 2.5 years. So, but last year through Measure O, we did order a replacement fire engine to one that was purchased via Measure O originally. We purchased a wildland fire engine that's still in service today, 4 command vehicles, and our swiftwater rescue trailer, which we used quite a bit this winter, thankfully. So a lot of great enhancements. There's also, as you recall, it partially paid for the construction of Station 5, Station 9, Station 10. I'm sorry, Station 10 and Station 11. So there has been a lot of enhancements via the public safety sales tax measure, and we're certainly looking forward to more in the future. And with that, I'll turn it over to the committee for any questions or comments that you might have.
Any questions?
What's the supply chain? I'm sorry, you again.
No.
It's okay. What's the supply, what's missing in the supply chain?
There's a problem with chassis. So getting the steel to build the chassis. And oddly enough, one of the biggest issues, and I know this is for the chief's fleet as well, is light bars. There's yards and yards of fire engines with no light bars on them because they can't get the pieces they need to build the light bars. So you kind of go from one end of the spectrum to the other, but those are the 2 major issues where we're running into problems getting fire engines delivered across the state.
Another random material that's having trouble as well is aluminum for the ladders that go on the trucks as well. And that doesn't necessarily have to do with Measure O, it's just something I've heard.
Yeah.
As we've had to replace things.
So it's just not my favorite thing that I get at Trader Joe's.
Can't go to Chevy and buy one, unfortunately, but yeah.
Thank you.
This one last question was for the police department. Should I wait till the end? I'm about to be at the end. But if there's no further questions.
If there's no further,
I have
go
a
ahead.
question. So I was asked, taking this, you have a pretty large beginning fund balance. Are you like in long-term looking at years to buy at the station, or is that?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. I've explained it to the body before, so, because I always get the question, so I'm ready for it. So when the sales tax measure was put into place in 2004, at the time, it was projected that the revenue that was saved into a fund balance would be able to build a fire station every 5 to 10 years. The problem is that the cost of construction has far outpaced that of the sales tax. So currently it's about $15 to $17 million to build a fire station. So we leave that reserve fund balance in there for a couple different reasons. Number one, if we have to do a major enhancement to a station, we could obviously pull that because that is an enhancement, not supplanting. But more importantly, what we hold it for is to either to close the gap on fire station construction or to purchase the property for a new fire station. So we currently have 2 fire stations that we're planning to build. Fire Station 5, which is funded through a CDBG DR and mitigation grant. So that's the replacement of the fire station that burned down in Fountain Grove. And then we're building Station 8 in Roseland, which is largely funded through, we have 2 state earmarks for $6 million. The Roseland Fire Protection District reserve fund balance of about $3.5 million. There's still a delta there. We're working on other funding sources for that. But if we have to come back, that would close the gap on Station 8 as that reserve fund balance. But, for the group, as a reminder, in our strat plan and deployment analysis right now, we need to build 3 other fire stations. So there's a lot that needs to be going on there. But right now it's used to close gaps, essentially.
That's going in line with where my question was going to be. So we have 8, which is going on Hearn. And then where are we at? And you may have just answered this with Quanah Springs currently planning.
Sure. So Fire Station 8 is going to go at the intersection of Hearn and Dutton, right across from Steve O's Market. Chair Minor's been at every single one of those meetings. She knows it very well. It's part of the Hearn hub. So the exciting thing about that real quick is that it's going to be not only a fire station, it's going to be the Roseland branch, the Sonoma County Library, and a cultural center is all going to be on the 6 acres that we were able to purchase there. What our strategic plan and deployment analysis shows is that by building that fire station there, particularly with the Hearn interchange getting widened, is we can move the current fire station location of Station 9 from Quanah Springs Road down the avenue. So we've owned this piece of property, and I think I make the joke, I've been here 23 years. I think that piece of property has seniority on me. And I drove over the other day and couldn't even find the property because it's been built up around it so much. So what the discussion is, and I talked to Assistant City Manager Nutt about this a couple weeks ago, is selling that piece of property and then looking for a piece of property further down the avenue, particularly with the infill and the building up that's going on farther down the avenue. So we're seeing that obviously that's where the impact's going to be. That's where we need to go. But we have the data and both of our plans that shows that it can move down to the area of Santa Rosa Avenue and Yolanda somewhere. So that's the next one on the list. I'll tell this group that we're currently working on a sales tax measure outside of this. Sonoma County Fire Chiefs is working on a sales tax measure that could generate potentially $62 million in revenue to the fire service as a whole a year. But for us, what we're looking for is to build those 3 fire stations, to staff those fire stations and put all the equipment in those stations. So that's forthcoming. You'll hear more about that soon, but we do have a plan for all of those because we just don't have the funding sources for Station 9, 6, and 12.
And as we're thinking of response times, which is what we heard top of the list, can you talk about the interrelation between Station 8, the Santa Rosa Avenue, Quanah Springs Station, and then the Hearn interchange improvement project that the council's recently funded?
Sure. It's very complicated, and I'll try to keep it short because so it's chess, not checkers when we move fire stations around, and we have to look at the long-term risk benefit or cost benefit analysis of moving a fire station. But there's two pieces to response times that we look at. Number one, it's the first arriving unit. So that first arriving unit could be responding to a medical aid, it could be responding to a car crash, or it can be responding to a structure fire. And structure fire is where we have National Fire Protection Agency data that we have to meet that response time. So it's NFPA 1710. The second part of NFPA 1710 is the full complement or full assembly of equipment at a structure fire. So for us, that's 3 engines, a ladder truck, and a battalion chief. So it's the full first alarm assignment. So number one, on the first piece with the first due, it's a very busy district, obviously. It's downtown, it's Roseland, and it's the southeast. And so it's very busy. So when our units are pulled off in different directions, obviously they're getting pinged pretty hard. And so if their call comes in down the avenue, either Sonoma County Fire Districts come from Todd Road or we're coming down the avenue. So Station 8 is going to be pivotal in that, getting across Hearn Avenue for the full assembly requirement of 1710. Because right now, as we all know, trying to get across Hearn at any point of the day, particularly rush hour, is almost impossible. So by widening that, it'll give us access across there sooner. So it'll help us with either one of those times. And then Station 9, when it's built, it's really going to help both those times a lot, especially as we see the infill housing going in. So the housing first strategy is working. Now we're just trying to build the public safety infrastructure behind it to support it.
Thank you.
Any additional questions?
You mean the fire department, or should I ask?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I have a question coming to ask. The in response, their hours, are you aware of the hours of?
Yeah, absolutely. So we launched in January of 2022 for 10 hours a day. It was from noon till 10 p.m.
Okay.
We've been really working toward expanding those hours. So in October, we were able to launch a second team. And that one, the first team, they work 7 days a week. The second team's working Monday through Thursday from 7 a.m. till 5. So they overlap in that afternoon for 5 hours. And then just next month, we're going to launch 7 days a week. It's a 15-hour model. So we're really excited about that. And then our only holdback right now is hiring the licensed mental health clinicians. It's a very competitive world for that. And when we can hire the clinicians and 2 more single role medics from the fire department, and our anticipated goal is this fall, then we'll have a third team, and they're going to be a late swing shift team of going either till 1 or 2 in the morning. We're still working on the exact hours, so we'd have that overlap. So the goal is in 2023 that we'll have 3 overlapping teams going throughout the day between a 17 to 18 hour service model.
Yeah, that's great. And hopefully, one day we'll have like a 24-hour team.
Yeah. So, and we are still on track to do that. It's all about the continued funding, but also the staffing. So our goal for that is early 2024 to be able to have a full 24/7 response model. And we're actually engaged in some conversations with the county of Sonoma right now about having a more systematic team throughout the county and then going toward that to a full 24/7 response model. There's actually a federal law that's going to require to have the county have some type of licensed mental health clinician 24/7. So we're trying to work in conjunction with each other on that. And Tina Rivera from the Behavioral Health has been a key partner in that.
Yeah, that's amazing because I know Santa Rosa, the population, I was like, remind myself it's at like 176,000, and to have one team available right now is, could you imagine, like if there's one call over at, a Catholic charity, and then, we got a call over downtown, but there's only one team available, and if they're preoccupied, that's very difficult. But hopefully, it sounds like there's a lot of ARPA money coming for the in-response team, and if they call for Measure O, they'll be pick up. But awesome, thank you for that information. That's really great to hear that it's increasing. So I wasn't aware of that, so it's great to hear that. Okay, down the line.
Yeah, it is. And we're able to go for the first year of service. They went to just over 2,800 calls for service. The team went. Wow. And the system navigators made 2,300 contacts, and the system navigators work behind to do the follow-up appointments. And then so our goal is to have, once we're fully funded with all these teams, to have this team going over the 5,000 calls a year in lieu of a police officer, and providing at the end of the day a much more trained and better resource than any of our officers are prepared to do for those in a mental health crisis.
Okay. I'm looking at the agenda, and we have public comment after.
So I think, by the way, I'm Sue Gallagher. You probably don't.
Oh.
It looks familiar.
I'm Jeff Burke in the city attorney's office. So I think you do need to review and approve by motion the budget and the plan.
Right here.
Yeah, because I was looking, they have the public comment after. So should we
I'm
do?
sorry, you're asking for public comment. You're exactly right.
Right, and then we do, because it don't make sense to vote, then ask for
No,
public. Okay.
You're right. I thought you were moving on.
No. No. Okay.
I am Sue Gallagher.
How you doing, Sue? So are there any public comments for?
Hands raised on Zoom and there were no emails.
Okay. With that being said, I need a motion to approve the budget.
You want to do it, Ellen?
I can't hear you.
Yo,
I move to approve the budget.
Okay, can I get a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Motion passed.
Who was the second? I didn't.
Ellen.
Was it?
There was like 4.
There were several people who
The
did that.
immediate past chair who hasn't been able to make a motion or second it for a few years.
I heard you, but you're next to me. Okay, are there any additional items that need to be put on our next agenda? We did have the budget, the single budget, year budget, so we would like
Right.
that.
So we'll have an item about the implementation plan and how to present it and get a recommendation from the.
And I don't know if this needs to be an agenda item, but to go back to my very first comments when I so rudely interrupted Jeff's presentation, something that can show us how to communicate to the public the other funds that are leveraged because of Measure O. So if we need to talk about it as an agenda item, or if it's just something that we can do to change how the reports are done. But, I know our chiefs, and I know Jeff, and I know our violence prevention folks do a lot of work to make sure that these funds are leveraged against other funds. And getting that into these reports, and then even more importantly, having that in 20 years when we're going back out to talk about it, is really important. And I know it's a tough task, but if we start it now, it'll be a lot less difficult in 20 years.
And the other agenda was the name of.
Yeah, we will come back with something to call this.
I put public safety and wraparound services, but that's just what I put.
What's that acronym though?
I'm not worried about the acronym. Say it.
Was the person on the what committee?
So if nothing else, no additional agenda items? Okay, we are adjourned.
What's that acronym? I'm like, you're serving on Mondays.
What?
Oh.